welcome back. So, when we are talking about from the beginning physical ergonomics, cognitive ergonomics, organizational ergonomics and varieties of tools and techniques that we are going to use and we are actually using throughout our research career, and of course you also now be much aware about all those things. At that point of time I would like to introduce a new very emerging field or very versatile area where lot of contribution are required from the side of ergonomist. So, that is neuroergonomics. So, when we are talking about neuroergonomics, I will just give brief introduction of this and how we are going to use this particular area for our advanced research and advanced teaching that we will be talking for today's class. So, let us understand what it is and how it is little different from whatever we studied in previous classes. So, let us understand this particular definition. Basically, we are talking about brain and behavior, how these two relations are there when we are talking about workplace. Okay, so it's not a very old concept, it's quite new. In 1998 first this definition or introduction of this particular area came into existence. So it says that we are talking about when we study brain and the behavior of these two combination at workplace, we will be discussing that neuroergonomics. So, this is the combination of two broader area which are interdisciplinary in nature by themselves. Okay. So, one is neuroscience, another is ergonomics. So, when we are actually merging these two concepts or two areas of interest together, then only this particular field has been generated and we are actually practicing it. So, the focus of neuroergonomics is mainly exploring the neural fundamentals of perceptual and cognitive functions in response to technologies and real life setting. So, when we are talking about perception, cognition, and what is the fundamentals exist behind these phenomena or these science, specifically in context of technological intervention, technological evaluation or the kind of instrument we are using, and in a real life situation that we are going to understand through neuroergonomics. So, when we are talking about seeing or hearing, attending, remembering, everywhere how the neural science is working and how that affects actually the human performance or the kind of activity we are doing at the working setup, we will be talking here. So, it further investigates this particular subject or particular domain. No, I do not say subject, it is majorly a domain. It mainly investigate the neural basis of any physical function. So, when we are talking about holding a particular object, so when I am holding that, what is the neural activity or neural behavior is present. So, if I am going to study those aspects, that will be and then if we transfer that those values or data in the use of ergonomic evaluation, that we will be talking as neuroergonomics. So, what is the principle behind this? So, when we are talking about understanding the processes through which the brain executes a particular complex task of daily life. So, when we try to understand that process, then this particular topic comes into picture. So, also this can be investigated not only in the laboratory setting, but also real life, that I explained in the first slide itself, that always we are talking about these aspects in the real setting. So, understanding the brain function which helps to develop and refine the ergonomics theory. So, that is neuroergonomics. So, let us understand what it does. It mainly helps to develop different kinds of models, frameworks and guidelines which we can use when we are talking about physical ergonomics, cognitive ergonomics or organizational ergonomics. So, how those neural responses are responsible to execute that particular job. We will be talking about those aspects in the field of neuroergonomics. So, when we practice neural ergonomics or neuroergonomics, then what exactly we try to do? Mainly we try to increase the efficiency of the worker as well as the safety of the person who is in that particular field. So, let us take an example, or let us understand how we are going to do that. So, a person, when he or she is operating particular instrument or particular workspace or workplace, he or she is interacting with those tools or instrument present at the workplace, right. So, now if I talk about physical ergonomy, so maybe while using that or while operating that particular system, lot of biomechanical stress are happening or generating in the body. Now, when that is happening, how my brain is behaving towards that and how that is actually maintaining my posture. So, how I am going to react on that if I understand those critical issues in terms of neuroscience, then I may be able to develop some good intervention so that that particular problem or issues are getting solved. So, that is the kind of outcome we are normally looking for. So, of course, it should be substantially economic to the society as well as to the employer. So, mainly when we talk about this type of implementation, who are the beneficiaries? That may be a big question, right, because whenever we talk about implementation of ergonomics issues ergonomic intervention, there is a question, what is the cost, how we are going to implement it. The same question is valid here as well. So, if we start answering those, here the main beneficiaries will be the developers who are developing those technologies. Like suppose I am going to use that technology, so who is developing that? Because if the developer on the beforehand knows how the neural behavior of that particular person who is going to use that technology, they will be in a better position to answer that, right. So, then the developers, of course, those owners who will be the operating those system, also the general public and society, if that particular technology is going to used by the common public. If not, those specific group of population who are going to use that. So, these are the mainly beneficiaries, these people are the main beneficiaries for this particular neuroergonomic studies and researches. So, overall the whole agenda of ergonomics and human factors of course can be benefited, because in ergonomics we are talking about the enhancement of productivity. So, whatever technologies we are developing, if it is beneficial to enhance the productivity, whatever the mean is, then ultimately the goal of ergonomics will be achieved. So, that is why neuroergonomics is very, very important for ergonomics. So, let us understand few techniques. So, I am not going to elaborate this one in each technique wise, but I will let you know that what are the varieties available. So, if you are interested, you can go back and check each one of them, but if you have questions regarding the understanding of these techniques, you can come back and ask us. Okay. So, very common instrument or common technique that we try to use in that the event related brain potential. So, ERP. Okay, it is very important concept what we use in case of neuroergonomics. Also, we use magnetoencephalography. Here also we try to understand how the neural behavior is happening, on how the neural activities are happening to answer or to react to the physical environment or the kind of product we are using. Okay, so that is very, very important. Now, also we have kind of different measurements, like these two techniques like fMRI and PET. We discussed it earlier in our previous few few days back that we used when we are talking about EEG, ECG and all. So these are some technique, especially when we talked about EEG, that how brain activities or brain waves we are recording. We mentioned that these techniques like fMRI and PET are more powerful to answer the kind of reactions are happening within the brain. So kind of responses are getting generated. So this is very, very important. Also, in new developing imaging technologies, whatever is available can provide the temporal and spatial solution together, okay. So which actually gives us an understanding how when time goes, how the activities or how the reactions are changing within body. So maybe it is physical, maybe it is cognitional, or in that case also neural behavior, okay. So that we come to know. So infrared spectroscopy is very, very important here. Also we have transcranial magnetic stimulation. So here also these techniques are also is important when we talk about brain imaging technology, and using that we can really understand how the neural behavior and how those things are can be recorded and analyzed for any kind of ergonomic intervention. So physical direct measurement, which we already discussed in our first few slides, like first few classes basically, are very commonly used at psychological studies, more recently in especially in ergonomics. So heart rate, skin conductance, blood pressure, etc. Now these things, how is associated with the neuroscience, how these are actually talking about the performance, productivity. When we try to analyze that and link, bridge that particular link, then if we get to understand that, then we will be able to develop such kind of product which is be very, very useful for the workers. So psychophysiology in ergonomics, this particular concept, okay. So psychophysiology in ergonomics, it's very upcoming field, and they are basically using these neuroergonomics. Now let us understand where the difference is between psychophysiology and neuroergonomics, because terminology wise it looks very similar, right, psychophysiology and neuroergonomics, but these are not really actual. So what is the difference? So the same, whatever we are talking about, both are same in terms of, if we are talking about aim of these two subject or these area of research is to design the safe and efficient technology and the system of for human work. When we are talking about all this, psychophysiology as well as neuroergonomics, both of these research group are talking about the same thing, how to improve the human performance. But when we try to go back and see how they are doing that work, the pathway, the way of doing work or way of looking at the data is different. So that is the distinct different features are available for psychophysiology and neuroergonomics. So let us understand few of them. So first, when we talking about psychophysiology, the focus of that particular research area is using physiological measures to observe their psychological correlates. Okay, so that only we do in terms of when we are talking about psychophysiology. But in case of neuroergonomics, those research groups or those researches are mostly concerned around the brain function. So physiological measures, whatever we get, like they are also getting physiological measure, but they are getting those physiological measure to understand the psychological correlates. But here same physiological measures we are using it to understand the brain function. Okay, so the kind of work, like how we are analyzing it, it is different. So physiological measures are used here to the extent of providing an index about the neural activity that neuroergonomics does. Now take another different way or pathway. So, physiological measures has less relevance to the brain function, such as heart rate, skin conductance. Then the relevance of neuroergonomics is also less and indirect, but for the psychophysiology it is other way different. Third, in psychophysiology, autonomic nervous system plays an important role in relation to somatic factors, emotion and stress. In neuroergonomics, however, the role of autonomic nervous system is mostly explored in relation of neural activity and human performance. So, how I am going, see, same autonomic nervous system functions we are trying to analyze, but the objectives of those two subjects or researches are little different. So, that is why these two are different area of research. So, in some neuroergonomic studies, no physiological measures are required as a variable. Take example, result of modification of some factors on a target discrimination task in which the location cues are provided prior to the target and yields the following results. So, one is reaction time to the target when preceded by an invalid location cue is disproportionately increased while the valid cue is not. Okay. So, this is just an example. The same way we have different scope of neuroergonomics. So, when we are talking about psychophysiology and neuroergonomics, both although looks very similar, but it is very important to handle these two subject or two research areas differently. But of course, there are a lot of scope where the same kind of data we can gather from one study and can use it for further different way of interpretation for different subject or different research area. That is why I thought that I will introduce this particular subject. So, where mainly we use them. So, mental workload assessment or vigilance assessment. So, specifically as I mentioned that fMRI, it has big role, it used as a kind of instrument or tool for this particular research area. So, take example like fMRI observation has showed that increased blood flow in prefrontal cortex, if you have the blood flow has been increased in the prefrontal cortex region, that can be used to quantify the mental workload. So, this is one technique. Okay. So, we are trying to understand the kind of fMRI reading, and if you see that prefrontal cortex has more blood flow, we interpret it as that mental workload is high or it is more than the other one. Okay. So, this way we may use it. So, to understand the mental workload, and understanding the mental workload and doing the intervention or planning for the intervention is really a great challenge nowadays for ergonomists, right. So, because now currently if you see the current job pattern, most of the work or workplace has been changed from physical manual job to sedentary automated or semi-automated job, where mental workload is very prominent. So, mental workload assessment is very important. So, neuroimaging studies also help to identify the differences among perceptual and cognitive, verbal and spatial, focal and ambient visual processing, etc. So, this is also important. Also, when we are talking about fMRI or other techniques where we do the brain imaging and all, working memory is also very important. Through that also we can understand, and through that we can take an account to understand the kind of performance or productivity they have at the workplace, right. So, this specifically when we are talking about assembly line work. So, the same monotonous job they are doing continuously, how they are actually coping up with the context, how they are actually coping up with the kind of stress they are getting, maybe physical stress wise, like if you check heart rate, if you check the blood pressure, maybe those are near to the baseline, but that doesn't mean that they are not having exertion. So what kind of exertion it is and how we are going to do the intervention for them to understand all this detail, maybe this is one of the tool or one of the way we can go for intervention or specifically design modification. That is one thing. Also spectral power in different EEG frequency also can be used to understand the attentional resources, like do you remember that we talked about alpha, beta, theta, all these type of waves when we discuss the EEG system, right, how the waves are. So if we get to understand how these waves are changing or how these waves are, what is the pattern of those waves, so then also we can interpret that how monotony of that particular job and how the mental stress people are getting when they are working at the workplace, and accordingly we need to plan for intervention, maybe modification, maybe changes, or maybe something very different that right now we cannot imagine. Okay. So one more thing is the adaptive automation. So real time assessment is very important for operators in a functional state if it is possible. So also to provide this automated adaptive automation, the optimal time that we need to understand, one needs to have the real time or near time as real time assessment with an accurate operator state classifier, right. So that also we need to understand, and we can do intervention using these neuroergonomic techniques. Also neuroengineering, mainly the brain computer interface, this is very new emerging field. So actually lot of studies are happening, but not really within India. We rarely get research publication from Indian context. So it's a very open field, very challenging field. So any of you are, if you are interested for this type of work, you can really come up with your proposals. So again, error counting is a big question always from the time when we started practicing, or we are doing or we are working for ergonomics, or we are practicing ergonomics, right. So here human error, like if you try to see these particular functions, maybe physical counting is a very old technique, right, but this physical counting is not only just human error, there are so many other errors associated for any particular task or any particular workplace situation. So how neuroergonomics is one of the big challenging area where we can classify it, we can specify it, and we can give better design solution for reducing human error. And as soon as we can reduce human error, of course productivity is going to increase, which is one of the goal of ergonomics. Also we are talking about learning and skill acquisition, which is going to happen if we develop the whole ergonomic whole workplace in such a way that these elements are being taken care. Okay. So learning and skill acquisition will automatically happen. So these are the major area of application when we are talking about neuroergonomics. So as I mentioned in the first beginning of this particular class, that I am not going to detail it out, but I am just going to introduce this particular subject for you, so that no future research groups you are, and you can start working on this particular field. So this is the major resource book that I used for preparing or understanding this particular domain or subject. Also there are many other groups, so whatever we are referring from the beginning, so there also will get references. and also I suggest you should study more of the research papers on neuroergonomics. Basically these works are being carried out in different good institutes abroad. Right now we have very limited limited resources available, maybe especially as per my knowledge within India. So being the young counterpart, so you are of course can join and then start or building up this particular area of research. Yeah, thank you.